Okay, thanks everybody for waiting. Sorry about that. We had some quick technical difficulties, but I think we are ready to go. Welcome to the second SMP seminar series of the semester 2, I suppose. Just a quick note that this seminar is being recorded, so let us know if this is an issue and feel free to turn your camera off if you're online and you prefer to do so. Before we get started, of course, I want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet today, the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, and pay my respect to their elders, past and emerging. And I also extend that respect to any Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people who are joining us in person today and online. Finally, I would like to extend that respect to the traditional custodians of the lands from which any of our online people are attending us. The sovereignty of this land was never ceded. It always was, and always will be Aboriginal land. A quick reminder for everybody today, just that our HDR student reps will be meeting for their fortnightly writing group from 1 to 4 p.m. This occurs in room 2.36 in the Flory building. So if you're here on campus, please feel free to drop in and join them if you're an HDR student. Everyone's welcome. Well, every HDR student is welcome. Welcome again. Today we have some fabulous presenters, and I'm really delighted to first introduce Dr. Brett Scholz. Brett is a critical health psychologist whose work focuses on lived experience leadership in health policy, services, research, and education. The majority of his publications are co-produced and co-authored by lived experience researchers. Recently, his research program has been adopted by Canberra Health Services with their current research strategy, which commits to going beyond engagement and involvement of consumers to a model partnership in which power imbalances are critiqued and redressed to ensure people with lived experience have decision-making and agenda-setting power, something that I think we can all agree is very important in that setting. Brett's presentation today is titled, Why I'm Tired of Co-Design, Engagement and Involvement. Are we really moving into participatory era or just polishing the glass ceiling? So without further ado, I'll have Brett come up and join us, and I'll get you set up here.
Thank you. Beautiful.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you. Well, Yuma, and good afternoon. It's exciting to see you all. The title's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I'm not, spoiler alert here, I'm not really tired of co-design, engagement, and involvement, but I'm tired of tokenistic practices of co-design, engagement, and involvement, which seem to be becoming more and more, I guess, commonplace. And the more that we hear of engagement of consumers in the health sector, the more we're seeing tokenistic practices kind of proliferating as well. So that's basically, you know, my presentation in a nutshell. But I guess I should tell you a little bit about why I think engagement and involvement isn't enough. So this graph shows us the number of publications using the words co-design in the title, abstract, or keywords published over the past 5 years or so. And the graph is actually organized by country. And so the country that in blue, that one that has the most publications using the words co-design in title, abstract, or keywords is Australia. I was surprised to see that actually, but not surprised with the overall trend. I think, you know, it's clear to see that back in 2017, there was less than 200 papers published using the words co-design, whereas looking at 2022, so last year there were more, I don't even know the number, but it actually was an exponential increase over the past 5 years. You know, in some ways that's probably a good thing, right? Because it suggests that we are thinking about how are we co-producing things with consumers? How are we moving to an engagement or an involvement kind of paradigm? In fact, I've even heard it claimed that we're in the middle of a participatory era. There's a paper about that we're in the middle of a participatory zeitgeist. And I guess, you know, my concern is we're seeing a lot more interest in engaging with consumers, people with lived experience, but we're not necessarily seeing the impact of that. We're not necessarily seeing that make a change. And I'm just going to also flag on the next, and throughout this presentation, I've got a few QR codes that I have not updated. So don't even bother trying to look at the QR code because it will not take you to a proper link. But the next slide is a quote from a consumer activist who puts it really well when he says, co-design in social policy is a paradox. On the one hand, it refers to a transformative set of mindsets, tools, way of knowing and ways of collaborating to design better and better design services, policies, and systems. On the other hand, everyone seems to be doing it, but our services, policies, and systems remain the same. So kind of speaking to that idea that, yes, we're seeing an exponential increase in terms of people being interested in co-design and talking about doing co-design and talking about being participatory, but that's not necessarily translating to a change in any kind of meaningful sense. Some of you might be familiar with this ladder. So the ladder of participation developed by Arnstein in the 1960s. It's been used in countless disciplines, not just health. And it's certainly not new. You know, this version of it was published in 1969. And it conceptualized participatory approaches on sort of a continuum or a ladder, where at the bottom rungs of the ladder, you have people, patients, members of the public, consumers, not really having any power, agenda setting or decision-making power at all. In the middle, you've got sort of what has been referred to as more tokenistic practices, so consulting with the public, but not necessarily engaging them, informing the public, but not necessarily bringing them into, you know, epistemic processes. And then at the upper echelons of that ladder, you've got members of the public, patients, consumers having control, whether that be, you know, you can see on the rung 6 there, partnership, so equal kind of power, delegation, where consumers or members of the public or patients have specific areas that they're in charge of, or at that top rung, citizen control, so having patients, consumers, members of the public taking leadership, having agenda setting and decision-making capacity over a project or an initiative or a service or a system. So keeping that in mind, I'm really interested in those upper echelons, as you've probably gathered, which is why I'm really ambivalent about this so-called participatory era. I asked AI to generate an image of what my ambivalence might look like, and that was what AI thought I would look like if I was being ambivalent. On the one hand, I'm really excited that we do have more interest in participatory approaches than we ever had before. On the other hand, I do agree with those, you know, the activists such as Simon, whose quote I said before, which is, even though we are having more co-design and now everyone seems to be doing engagement involvement, but at the same time, the actual opportunities to move up this ladder are kind of ironically decreasing, if anything. The more emphasis that we have on these tokenistic levels of consultation and co-design, the less I'm seeing examples of consumers actually being in control of health services or health research or health policy or health education. So I'm torn. I think I'm particularly torn when people talk about examples of working with consumers as being new and bold. You know, that ladder, as I said, that was produced back in 1969, and it wasn't necessarily a new idea then, but that citizens, members of the public, should have control over our systems. Yet it was only last October, the Cochrane collaboration brought out this new consumer collaboration toolkit, and they called it, they literally used the word, it was new and bold. And part of me died inside because I thought, well, is it really new and bold? You know, we've been saying that consumers should be part of our systems for decades now. These things should actually be just what we do as a matter of course. It shouldn't be new and bold. I guess similarly, I see papers talking about co-researchers And often there are consumer co-researchers on papers, which is really good to see. But sometimes I see papers that refer to consumer co-researchers talking about people who are not referenced on the authorship list, not even in an acknowledgement list. So whereas if I, collaborated with any of you and I called you my co-researcher, but left your name off of an authorship list or acknowledgement list, you'd be pretty pissed off with me, fairly so. Yet we're seeing that happen, even, happening at all is probably too often. Yeah, and it's a concern. So I guess in summary, for that first bit of my talk, there's a proliferation of engagement and involvement in the health sector. On the one hand, it's great. On the other hand, I do worry that it's holding us back from moving up that ladder. In the words of another fabulous consumer activist and academic, Indigo Dyer, she says it's good to move up that ladder, and we want to be moving up that ladder, but it's even more important to be honest. So being upfront about the limits of your participation process is one way to recognize power, avoid tokenism, and build trust. So I think in our rush to feel like we need to be in this participatory era that I don't think we're actually in yet, I see, claims about co-researchers, claims about things that are new and bold, when actually it would be so much more refreshing if somebody said, you know what, we're actually only at that tokenistic level right now. We're only really doing consultation, but we're at that rung, we're at rung 5, we're not at rung 2 anymore, rather than making claims that they're up at, rung 7 or 8 when they're really not. It seems obvious, but the fact that people even have to say that it's important to be honest about where you are on that ladder, I think, is quite telling. So okay, so what is beyond engagement and involvement then? And I guess this is a very wordy slide. One of my PhD students is spending her entire PhD answering this question. And if you're familiar with any of my work, and happy to share any work with you at any stage, but my work's all about lived experience leadership, thinking about how we actually get to, rung 7 and 8 on that ladder. So what is lived experience leadership? Well, again, Stephanie's PhD is trying to answer that question, and I'm not going to pretend that I can do justice to giving you a good answer just in the next minute or so, but some of the key issues to mention are that lived experience leadership is enacted within a variety of roles to affect change to improve consumer circumstances. Lived experience requires lived experience and leadership capacity. Lived experience leadership is performed through a variety of processes, which might include collaboration, direct or indirect influence over decision-making, application of lived experience, development of inclusive cultures. Those are just some of the key elements that we've identified as being crucial to lived experience leadership. So those upper rungs of that participatory ladder. There's more as well, of course, but that's sort of, if I try to distill it into a slide, that's what I came up with. And I guess the other thing that a lot of my work is interested in is the fact that these opportunities for lived experience leadership are across the health sector, and there's 4 particular domains that I've seen good examples of lived experience leadership playing out. So they are policy, services, research, and education. And I'll just give a brief example of where I've seen that happen. So in policy, there have been some developments, and I think it was last year, it might have even been at the end of the year before last year, the Victorian government announced a senior role, an executive director of lived experience, that's the same level of their executive director of clinical experience clinical practice in the mental health of Victorian Health Department. So that's a really, I guess, a very obvious example because it's such a senior leadership role. And that's not, I don't want to try and give the impression that lived experience has to have a senior role like that, but I think it's really nice to see, leadership from the top. And I don't see enough of this senior policy leadership dedicated role. So I guess that example is just one to bring about because it's where I'd like to see the sector go, but where only pockets of the sector are going so far. In terms of services, one of the ones that comes to mind are peer-led services. And I guess some of my examples do come from the mental health space because that's where a lot of the background, a lot of the sort of consumer leadership history comes from, and where there's been a lot of advocacy. But this is across the whole health sector. But in mental health specifically, there are peer-led organisations. So there's groups like Flourish in New South Wales, which is led by people with lived experience, and it's for people with lived experience. The leadership is mostly people with lived experience and a few people who don't have lived experience. And they also have a, what is it called? They have an initiative called Why Not a Consumer, or Why Not Somebody with Lived Experience. So whenever they actually do employ someone for their, in any role in their organisation, they're meant to ask themselves, why don't we employ somebody with lived experience into this role, regardless of what level that role is at? Research, and sorry, I realized that there's a bit of an, I gave this a version of this presentation to a cancer survivorship conference earlier this year. So that I want to see this in survivorship by Survivor 33. That's a little bit irrelevant for here, but in research, I would like to see more consumer researchers and CIs on grants. You know, we're starting to see that NHMRC, for example, is starting to require statements about how you've collaborated with consumers or how you will collaborate with consumers. Very seldom do I see consumers included as CIs on grants. I just finished what's it called, reviewing ideas grants for this year, and the algorithm often matches me with, you know, co-design and that kind of thing. And there were lots of projects that talked about co-design as a central aim of a study, but didn't have any consumer CIs. Maybe one or two might have had consumer AIs on the grant. But I think if it's a central aim of your projects, then we need to start thinking, well, how do we have more consumer CIs? Of course, that then speaks to the fact that we need more consumer researchers employed as well. I think, you know, in our college, we do actually have Acacia, for example, which has dedicated lived experience roles for some of our colleagues, but those sorts of roles are few and far between, which is kind of ironic. It's 2023, and the first consumer academic position ever in the world was in Australia, and that was established in 2020. The University of Melbourne has and still has a consumer academic employed in their mental health nursing program. And the same consumer has a brilliant colleague, Kath Roper, has occupied that position for 23 years now. And I think back in the early 20s, people thought, okay, this is going to be more and more the norm. Soon every mental health school across the country will have a dedicated consumer, or at least one consumer academic, but there's only about 6 or 7 across the country at last count, which is better than it was, but it's still not as good as it could be. Anyway, sorry, looking at time, I realized that I need to get to my last slide so that I can get through this. But I guess the point of this slide is to say, you know, there are some great examples of lived experience leadership across policy, service, research, and education, but not as many as I would like to see. And, you know, if we are going to move up that ladder, then we need to think about how we're ensuring that there are positions for people with lived experience across the health sector. Otherwise, essentially, I think we're stuck at those sort of involvement, engagement, application levels, which is kind of creating a bit of a glass ceiling effect, where we're not having enough opportunities for people with experience to be moving up into those senior positions. Okay. If you've seen me talk about this before, you might have actually seen these exact slides. I'm going to leave you with 5 or so things that you can do to help us move up that ladder now. The first thing that you can be doing today is to be reading and citing consumer-led or co-produced work, showing that you are valuing work that is led by people with lived experience. Obviously, in some fields, there's less of that available than in others, but whenever I start a new project, my first, you know, Google Scholar search is for co-produced, and then whatever the topic is. If you're working in, say, the mental health space, there's actually a lot of co-produced and consumer-led mental health work, and you can look in terms of MAD studies and other areas like that. If you're in some other fields that don't have the same kind of history as, say, mental health, then it might be harder, but not impossible for you to find some of that work. I think don't settle for the lower bars of co-design, engagement, and involvement. If there's an opportunity to move up a rung on that ladder, think about how you might do that. And think about how you do that over time as well. You know, you might be working on a project right now that where you can only have, say, for example, a very small advisory group that doesn't necessarily have agenda setting power over your project. But then you might say, okay, when we've completed that, we're going to think about how we move from an advisory board onto the next level, which might be having a consumer CI as part of your team when you're applying for funding, and then building from there. Yeah, so essentially not settling for those lower bars. If that QR code was working, which it's not, it links you to a really good paper of mine, if I do so myself, about talking about not settling for the lower bar. If you Google my name and settle lower bars, it'll come up. I'm happy to send it to you all. But essentially, yeah, I worry that whenever we talk about engagement and involvement now, and those words are kind of becoming so normalized, it's actually stopping us from moving up beyond just an engagement and involvement paradigm. The next thing you can be doing is build collaboration into your projects and teams and budgets. This is just a screenshot from a budget where I didn't necessarily specify that for this grant I was going to employ somebody from a lived experience perspective, but you know, think about how you can make sure that your budgets have space to be including people with lived experience. And if you feel like you're applying for a scheme that wouldn't necessarily approve of that, like I was here, you don't have to say it's for a lived experience researcher, but make sure that you're able to remunerate people with lived experience for their expertise. Think about power and think about interrogating power. I think sometimes as academics, we can often kind of forget that we are actually quite powerful and we're always struggling for the next grant or the next publication or the next whatever, but we actually have a lot of capital in terms of our knowledge and our expertise is taken seriously. People with lived experience and that experiential expertise is not taken as seriously as our so-called expertise is. So think about how you can use your space and your power to make space for people working from a lived experience to have their expertise valued. Yeah, on the next slide. Think about what hats you're wearing. I've been in so many meetings where people have said things like, or one person said, oh, we really need to get somebody with lived experience in this project. And someone else has said, and somebody else, say working from, I don't know, a nursing perspective, has said, oh, it's okay, I've also got lived experience, so I can talk to that perspective. And instead of opening opportunities for other people with lived experience to come and join teams and contribute, that kind of occupying that space can shut doors down. And it's kind of become this normalized thing. I guess my point is, think about, it's okay if you do have lived experience as well as your other discipline experience that you have. But if you are wearing those dual hats, don't occupy that hat and not share opportunities with other people with lived experience to come and join your team. Think about opening doors rather than shutting them. Make sure people with lived experience are in the room, and that reference to karaoke comes from a paper that we wrote where some collaborators, some consumer collaborators on the group talked about a time that they were invited to a Christmas party, and they were at karaoke event with their team. And it was the first time that they'd been part of the team outside of a meeting room and realized that actually sometimes decisions were made outside of meeting rooms. So, you know, you don't necessarily have to invite them to karaoke, but just thinking about the spaces where your decisions are made in your teams, and maybe including your consumer collaborators in ways that they haven't been engaged in or involved before, or think about how decisions are made outside of meeting times and making sure that people aren't excluded from decision-making opportunities. Okay, and then my last kind of message is to build. I know I can be really critical, and I can, because I think we can do better, but I also realize that we need to start somewhere, and we're not all necessarily up at that top of that ladder yet. So, you know, it's okay even if you are somewhere else on that ladder, or you haven't even thought about where you might go on that ladder yet, because it is something that has to be built over time and thought about. So I guess my last kind of message is don't be afraid about building even from the very beginning of the ground up. I think I'm probably at time, so I will just finish there, and I think you get my message. So yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Okay, we can just take some questions from online or in the audience there. If anybody has specific questions for Brett, we might just have 1 or 2 minutes and then move on. Yeah, coming back to you, Nathan.
So I was on Twitter the other day, so often am, and there was somebody who'd been to a conference, and they had been watching a guy talking about citizen science, and the guy had been talking, the girl, I suppose, but I think it was a guy. The guy had been talking about how there was a need to professionalize citizen science and citizen scientists, and I think that the same idea is not just present in here, but you're kind of arguing for professionalization of consumer perspectives and their expertise and so forth. And I think we already see that in peak bodies and the kind of people that represent those things. But what happens when you do that, of course, is you get a certain kind of person from a certain kind of background, with a certain kind of lived experience, with a certain kind of ability to express and articulate that experience. So does that kind of thing worry you, the potential homogenization by the people that fit in here, and the fundamental likelihood that the people that will rise to the top, if that's not an inappropriate metaphor, will be white middle class, essentially of a certain acceptable phase?
Yeah, so it's so nuanced, and I think there's probably multiple issues there. I think on the one hand, at the moment, we're not valuing people with lived experiences, expertise in the same way that we are, say, a psychologist or a bioethicist or other disciplinary experts. And so part of what I'm concerned about is that we need to value that lived experience as a valid form of knowledge regardless. And sometimes, and you're not doing this, but sometimes people use that argument to shut people out and to say, oh, we're only ever going to get a certain kind of knowledge. So rather than create opportunities for more diversity in lived experience roles and opportunities for people, I see people using that argument to shut people out. So I also worry about that argument being used as a way of saying, oh no, we can't include. I guess the second thing I also wanted to briefly mention is another element which I didn't really talk about is around consumer expertise. And many people in that space do think of their knowledge as being collective, not just as their own knowledge, in the same way that, say, psychologists think of psychology as a body of knowledge. And so the more opportunities we can create for people to be part of that ecosystem, the more that body of knowledge will develop as a collective. And I guess the last thing is, of course, yes, there are issues in terms of, and particularly in the mental health space, actually, a lot of the work that we've done in terms of consumer leadership in the mental health space has been white middle-class females who are the ones who often occupy peer roles of experience leadership roles. It's definitely an issue. I think it reflects broader issues that aren't unique to this. I think that's something that all of academia and all of society share. So I think we do need to keep making sure diversity happens. But I guess, my worry is that I don't want people to use that as an excuse not to try to bring diversity into the question.
Thanks, Brett. I think we might move on. And if we have more questions, you can chat to Brett afterwards if he's able to stick around, or maybe after his presentation. Okay.
Are you heading now, Brett? Okay. Brett's gonna head off, unfortunately, but please feel free to send him an email if you have any more questions. I'm sure he's happy to respond by email.
Okay. For our next presenter, we have Dr. Hanna Suominen and Mr. Chirag Peditarachi. Professor Hanna Suominen is at the forefront of accelerating health impact from personalized precision medicine technology through the application of advanced data analytics and machine learning. She is a professor of computer science at the Australian National University, the associate director in neuroinformatics of the ANU John Eccles Institute of Neuroscience, and the executive leader, computing and engineering of the ANU Our Health in Our Hands strategic initiative. Hanna has almost 20 years experience of working at the interface between technology, education, and health sciences, and is passionate about co-producing research and education with Lightcast and Conan Medical, among others. By bridging disciplines, professions, and areas of expertise, Professor Suominen is co-creating tools that will transform tedious tasks into AI-assisted workflows, thus releasing human labor for more meaningful duties and enhancing Australia's prosperity. Alongside Hanna is Mr. Peditarachi, who has recently submitted his PhD thesis for review and currently conducting postdoctoral research at the College of Engineering, Computing, and Cybernetics. He designs and develops reinforcement learning-based artificial pancreas systems to control blood sugar levels in type 1 diabetes. The title of their presentation today, I think I skipped one page here. Oh, sorry about that. Is Powering Efficiency and Effectiveness in Personalized Precision Health with AI. I think this is a very topical seminar talk, and I'm going to pass it over to Professor Suominen. There you go.
I think that we had a lovely introduction of that already. Lovely to see so many of you here and also online. I'm Professor Hanna Suominen, and Chirag Peditarachi will be joining me very soon. And today we talk about precision medicine or personalized precision health, like I like to term it, and specifically AI. And I think that we have quite a few nice linkages with the important messages about co-creation in the previous talk. So before we get going, I would like to really acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we are meeting, the Ngambri and Ngunnawal people. And I hope that all of us who are participating in the seminar will join our best efforts in following the leadership of the First Nations people in looking after the lands where we are meeting. Here's a beautiful piece of art that is on the wall of the supercomputer here at ANU, and a lovely, lovely quote by the artist there too. But the art symbolizes the gathering of knowledge from different places, sources, and the bringing together of an ever greater collective knowledge system. So that's about the diversity of people and us following the leadership of those who have been here for tens and tens of thousands of years. So Chirag and me, our job is to keep these machines hot and produce co-creative discoveries with them. What we are really passionate is about helping to provide easily accessible, accurate early diagnosis and better disease monitoring, preferably at home, so that it's not only us who have the opportunity to live close to hospitals and healthcare systems who can get that high quality healthcare and technologies that support those interventions. Our Health in Our Hand was the first of the strategic Grand Challenge initiatives of the ANU. We were very lucky to win that bid and have been running with the concept and building on it, making it bigger and better for 6 or 7 years now. So the mission is to facilitate the deep personalization of medicine, to diagnose, monitor, and support accurate treatment of disease tailored to individual need irrespective of geographic location or social circumstances, enabling healthcare to be provided equally and effectively to a rapidly growing world population, and that effectiveness and efficiency is the part that we are today talking about, and how AI can feed into that one. It's not only my work. There were 52 of us originally in Ohio. Now it has been more than 100 experts contributing to the work. And the particular program that I have been leading is called Big Data and Machine Learning. Here you can see our program goals that go for classifying diseases and their subtypes, looking into the future to try to help with the prognosis and monitoring of the therapeutic interventions or treatments, and improving the accuracy and reliability of that prognosis, improve the monitoring and patient outcomes, build trust into this system, because the privacy is something that in health informatics cannot be taken for granted, and we cannot compromise it. And prepare the way forward for research translation. Here are some of the key people that I have had in the program to support me. So initially in 2017, it was myself, Associate Professor Nan Yan, Associate Professor Deb Apthorpe, and Dr. Uwe Zimmer proposing the concept, and we already had Wenbo Ge supporting our research as a PhD candidate. After that, we were successful and brought a cohort of PhD candidates, Girard, Fran, Robin, and Sandaroo, to join our forces, and they have excelled and are all transitioning from that PhD candidature to postdoctoral work. We will hear more from Girard about that one soon. We had postdocs and research fellows and fellows joining us, Zakir, Elena, and Artem, to name a few. Some have transferred already, but new people are joining, like Nicola, Mujumi, and Chen Chen in our research. We are very open, by the way, so if you are open of interacting with us and joining our work and looking into opportunities like that, don't hesitate to contact me. So this is the vision where we started from. Sustainable non-invasive markers. So in 1970s, that was when the MRI was being invented. 2017, when proposing the Crown Challenge, MRI was still the gold standard, but in order to get the benefits of that expensive examination, one has to be able to get to a hospital, and not everybody can do that. On the other hand, with diabetes, we have invasive markers that finger pricking. But if you have to do that every day, multiple times, that costs a lot of money. And for young people who are becoming independent from their parents, that's particularly burdensome. And it's not nice to keep on pricking yourself every day. So our vision was that what can we do with the new types of sensors that, for example, assesses your blood glucose and insulin levels from your breath or saliva? And what can the sports sensors and wellness applications do in this equation? The concept that really helps us in computing to tackle the challenge is marker in its wide sense. Here's a definition of biomarker. But what is the key there for a computational person like me is something that we measured and evaluated systematically at scale. So that is the part which really helps to compose the problem of monitoring and measuring these markers in a computational way that helps us to understand it. Here are some of the work that we have been working. So we have been working on minimally invasive markers, like assessing one's cognition status by doing finger tapping on a smartphone, or to say and seeing how your vocal channels are changing. And we have been successful in validating markers that our expert neurologists cannot hear, things that a human ear cannot hear. So one of the success stories, which is not a home-based monitoring device, but it is something that could be done easily in an eye testing clinic outside hospital, is the objective field test or analyzer led by Professor Ted Mattis, which many of you know already, but it's a good way to test us scientists. So when we started this visual field testing, so testing brain and eye health by staring through a device that looks a bit like binoculars, but in the end of the binoculars, there's these yellow circles that look a little bit like eyes of an owl staring back at you, and the colors, they keep on vibrating a bit. No need to press anything, just relax. And people of my age, well, this is brilliant. We have a 6-minute test. You can just meditate and stare and not worry about missing the times when you were supposed to press a button or anything like that, which happens to me all the time. But our young, lived, experienced experts with diabetes said, that's boring. It takes way too long time. We need to do something. And that challenges machine learning scientists who are really good in fast computations related to evaluation to help Ted's team to make the test run in 82 seconds for both eyes for all of the 40 learns in these pictures. We are going to talk about the efficiency a little bit more, but just to get to the evaluation topic with this OFA machine, the area under the receiving operating characteristics curve, which is a probability telling how good the test is, 100% is the best one, 50% is random. So we want to be there in the high 80s or 90s range. And this test is extremely accurate for both relapsing remitting MS and progressive MS, which is brilliant. But for clinical practice, those numbers or statistical significance tests, like we know, they mean very little. We are more interested in assessing effect sizes here using HSG. And getting values, which we got about 2, is commonly known with this particular measure to be a huge effect size. But what else can we do? More on the evaluation and the vision here. So it's about smart sensing and sense-making systems. So supporting both that sensing phase and then making use of that data. So it's important to consider here that our goal is not to replace the medical experts. So here's Professor Christian Luig as a head of neurology. We are not planning to get rid of them. We are planning to use their time better and help them to scale their capability and also support more junior doctors to know what they are supposed to be paying attention to. And having these home-based, remote, easily accessible tests to help time those more intensive measurements, invasive measurements, like going to hospital for that brain MRI better. So here are the minimally invasive tests that we have been working on. There's a lot of crunching happening in those supercomputers to make sense of all of those measurements and bring them together through a model to customize insights. And what I'm really excited is that closing the loop, going back and supporting the treatment. And Chirag is going to tell more about that one. There are new things along the way. What I'm particularly curious is in this modeling to reverse the cycle. So quite often in machine learning AI, we go from the measurements straight to diagnosis, classifying, for example, MS or Parkinson's and diagnosis. And it's not really interpretable. That's not trustworthy when you don't know what is the mechanism and what's the logic to go from good health towards signs and symptoms or these markers, towards conditions and their families. So that's what I would like to do. And also how to really make sure that one can gain benefits from these, which are not just statistical significance tests, but actually better workflows, faster and more reliable workflows. What we have been doing really well is this cohort-centered co-creation. We had an external review in March, and we got assessed as a national exemplar in how co-creation can be done well, and how our lived experience experts are very much embedded in every single step of the research, from creation of the concepts to the actual evaluation and implementation, and how they have meaningful contributions as co-authors in papers. But then the next part, where are we going next? So I tried to come up with what is this personalized precision health informatics looking like, and started to do some definition searching with mesh browser in this case. Health informatics, clinical informatics, medical informatics, you name it, it's pretty well defined. But then there's a messy concept, which is this personalized precision health. What does it mean? So for example, in the mesh browser, they are considered personalized health and precision health are considered as synonyms. We started to look at a little bit more and conducted a systematic review and published a protocol about that one already, trying to understand the concepts. And I'm still in discovery, and I very much welcome people helping me to guide it. But what I do know is that AI, it's nothing new and bold. Going back to the previous talk, its origins are in 1950s in work by people like Turing, with the famous Turing test, you know, if that's a machine or if it's a human that we are having a conversation with. The definitions, the acceptable definitions came from 1955 and 1959. And in the summer schools, the experts of the field thought that this is a challenge that is going to be solved in 3 months. Well, it's not 3 months from 1955, and we are still there. The typical classification is that we have supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning. And we are going to look into those a little bit more with a focus mainly on supervised learning and reinforcement learning. Here is one paper, this is not by us, where people have related artificial intelligence and personalized precision health together very well. And it really helps me to think, but I think that there's more what we need to do to try to really get the synergies of the concept. But I think that this framework is an excellent starting point. This is a bit like I think about it and where the value is. So I mentioned already those monitoring of the markers and going from the signs and symptoms to conditions and their families and how to use the data set better. So if we have these records or data points marked with respect to signs and symptoms of given conditions. So in the picture, the red ones would be the neurological conditions and the blue ones could be eye-related conditions as an example. And the merging of that data, we can then take the benefits of holdout validations that we are pretty good in machine learning doing in a way that one can trust to build these classifiers that feed out precision health technologies and solutions, and validated markers and sensors can help in those, but also they can optimize the data collection and improve the return on investment of the existing data sets. And TED has had a beautiful collection of data with the OFI that enables things like that. My background originally is in evaluation. Here's one example publication where we showed that when you do this slicing and dicing of the very big matrices of data really well, you get not only better performance evaluation metrics values on average, but also smaller variability or variance between the estimates that we get in evaluation, which tells that that would translate, the method probably translates better to unseen data, such as the use in hospital. But there is a science and art in how do we do these evaluations in a way that improve efficiency and effectiveness. And that's where our specialty is. Here's an example of a paper where we have showed how to do this effect size evaluation in order to understand in the public literature which one of the validated markers of Parkinson are mostly used and which ones are the ones that actually give the best effect size. Here's another one, an example of using Shapley values of effect sizes. In addition to the normal effect size evaluation, we showed that the Shapley value method, it gives the same type of a ranking of the top performing features in machine learning of markers as p-values or effect sizes, and those by human observation, the rankings make sense and are the same. In addition to this, the toolkit that we have released, the tutorial that goes on it, guides the field. How can we validate these markers? How can we know we need more participants of this kind? So we can assess at the system level for each feature. For example, do I need more positive instances, positive cases, people with this condition more? And what's the effect if I get someone like that as an additional participants? The same with negatives, and not only going by participant, but also drawing summary statistics. This is a very complicated summary. I'm not even trying to talk it through here. There's a paper and there's code, and we are available. But what I want to next spend a couple of minutes of time, so 10 minutes, is Giraffe telling about the reinforcement learning, and then we will conclude. Giraffe.
Thanks, Hanna. So previously we were like mainly focusing on the supervised learning aspects of machine learning. When it comes to treatment, the most like appropriate types of algorithms are called reinforcement learning, because treatment becomes a decision-making problem. So the roots of reinforcement learning is actually from psychology of law of effect, like learning by trial and error. So what happens is I'll sort of like take you through the structure of a reinforcement learning algorithm through this example. So imagine you're going to train your dog to fetch a ball, and you go to a park to do this kind of thing. So the dog or the puppy will actually see the environment, you, the ball or the stick that you have. And once you sort of like do the action of like throwing the ball or the stick, eventually we will need to do some encouragement to the puppy. So it learns the underlying objective, the task at hand of getting the ball and retrieving and getting it back to us. So the important thing behind this architecture is there's some sort of like a agent. The puppy is the agent in this scenario, or the AI algorithm. It receives some observations from the environment that it lives in, and we give it some rewards or feedback, and we reinforce best behavior to achieve a certain objective through the selected actions. So these types of algorithms are like, even though they have been there for a long time, it has been like very popular in the recent couple of years because of tasks like, let's say, playing chess, Go, or making robots to walk. So at the beginning, the robots don't know anything of like the concept of walking, but you can move a couple of actuators and we will define the objective and give rewards. So the idea is the robot, or like in this case, like playing chess, you need to get more and more rewards as much as possible to achieve this task. So what we have done in our research is try to apply this to type 1 diabetes. To give a brief like background in type 1 diabetes, the body doesn't produce insulin. So we have to give insulin externally to the body to maintain the glucose levels. And there's some sort of like a normoglycemic level that we want to achieve. But it's more complex because the food we eat, exercise we do, stressful scenarios, sleeping, is all of these kind of things affect the glucose regulation. So knowing what is the right amount of insulin to give into the body is very hard. So it's a decision-making problem where, based on the environment, the observations that you see, you have to take the decision of the right amount of insulin. If it's too much insulin, it could be detrimental. And even if it's less insulin that you are giving to the body, still there are many consequences. So what we are doing is we are closing the loop in the sense by applying reinforcement learning to make this decision. So there's a device called an artificial pancreas system, which was only like introduced in Australia, approved by the TGA in 2019, where you have a glucose sensor attached to the body with a pump. So the glucose sensor will measure the glucose values every 5 minutes, and the task of the pump is to give that insulin into the body. So what we are trying to come up with is the algorithm to connect these two together. So this is a high-risk medical device. So at the first stages, what we do is we use FDA-approved simulators to show the accuracy of our models, the reinforcement learning algorithms that we design. So what happens is, now in this case, the reinforcement learning algorithm, it will see the past glucose trajectories trends. And based on clinical feedback, we give some sort of reward to the algorithm, and it learns by trial and error to give the right amount of insulin into the body. So the process is quite similar as I sort of like the example that I brought of like teaching the dog to fetch something. But the important thing here is we need to have a good understanding about what we are trying to achieve. So the clinical expertise is very valuable in defining the reward that we are going to these algorithms. So if we can't really like, in order to develop these reward functions, we have been working with endocrinologists to understand what is the exact objective that we need to achieve. So based on these studies we have done, we have been able to focus on one of the important areas in one of the limitations in existing treatment. So for example, if you are going to have lunch after this seminar, if you have type 1 diabetes, you have to think 20 minutes in advance, think about the carbohydrate content of the meal, and then you have to take insulin, as I said, 20 minutes in advance to counter what you're going to eat. So there's a huge deal. So this adds a cognitive burden to people with type 1 diabetes. So based on their feedback, what we thought was to try to approach this problem and come up with a way to reduce the cognitive burden. So the algorithms that we designed doesn't really need these meal announcements or carbohydrate estimations. Rather, it is able to control the glucose levels. And through our in silico trials that we have done, we have been able to achieve better performance compared to the clinical treatment, the standard clinical treatment that we have right now, while eliminating these meal announcements. And on the right-hand side at the top, what you can see is a strategy learned by these AI algorithms. Still, there's a lot more to do because the explainability, the safety aspects need to be evaluated. So in order to do that, we have designed a tool called CapsML. So you can visit this website, capsml.com, and you can try out and simulate how these reinforcement learning algorithms work. So this is based on the FDA-approved models that I mentioned before. So you can try out and create your own scenarios. So the reason that we deployed this tool was to get the engagement from the clinicians as well as lived experience experts, so that we can understand what are the limitations, for example, in real life, what could happen that we are not really taking into consideration in the simulations. For example, if you skipped a meal, would the AI be able to like counter it, count it? So these kind of scenarios. So far people have been using this tool and we have been getting good feedback. So this is pretty much like a brief summary into the treatment aspects of the work that we are doing.
Wait a second, let's just have a little conclusion slide and then hopefully we have time for one question. So to conclude, our research has been bringing the next generation of AI-empowered personal precision health technologies to bear for more than 7 years now. What is important here is that with AI, one needs to have an approach that is resourceful and responsible. And that needs to consider both the sensing and sense-making part in order to help make the real-world practice in healthcare more sustainable and equitable. Otherwise, if we don't do that, we generate published papers, but actually no impact whatsoever. What is needed here and what can really be a game changer is the implementation of the methods in the deep analytical data science platform. Giraffe's demo is an example of those, so that one can accelerate co-creation and better discoveries also in health and medicine, so not only in the technologies or sciences. The contributions will drive eventually systemic changes towards a healthier nation and also globally. So thank you so much. And the part that I want to finish with is a quote from MS Symposium 2020, where one person living with MS said to me something that keeps me up gets me up to work every morning, full of energy. Thank you for giving us hope. So that's the real value when we do something that has power to help people be better.
Wonderful. If you guys are happy, we'll stick around for 1 or 2 questions, and then we also have our biscuits and coffee that we'll pop outside. Yeah. Any questions from the audience or online? Feel free to pop them in the chat box.
I think we are between the teeth. I think we have a full on day.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. That's all right. If we don't have any questions, we can close the seminar.